Got a little winter project here. I'm going to be replacing these traditional bars, which are going on another bike, with some integrated one-piece bars. And these are the Avian Canary bars, which after a long process and research, I chose for my wind space. So in this video, what I'm going to do is first discuss, let's call it foreplay, of why I actually picked the Avian Canary bars. Then I'm going to give you the typical unboxing and weigh-in video. Then I'm going to discuss, the intricacies installing. And then hopefully if the weather breaks here, because it's real cold, I'm going to do an initial test ride. And then I'll wrap up. I've always had the urge to upgrade the handlebars on my Windspace SLC3. Recently, I was in at the local bike shop in Calgary, Alberta, and got to play around with the new Roval on the Specialized Athos 2. And it was a little flexy, but more scary was the $700 price tag. While doing my usual Friday night gear porn watching, I stumbled upon a video from China Cycling, aka Panda Podium. And I thought to myself, maybe I should order a bar from China. Unfortunately, the Panda Podium bars didn't quite meet the needs or shape of the existing bar I had. So I did a little bit more research and stumbled upon the Avian series of bars, which they have 3 tiers, with the newest one being the Paris, which is one of the lightest bars made at a relatively reasonable price when you compare it to the super ultralight high-end options. After an exchange back and forth with the Rides of Japan, aka Slayer of Grams, the conclusion was there's no way I should get a Paris, and I should probably consider the slightly heavier bar because it would be really flexy under my 99.92 kilogram X power lifter girth. One of the main reasons I picked these Canary bars is that they have a very similar drop or lower portion of the handlebar to my previous Eastons, which I just love. Also, on another bike, I have a set of Specialized carbon hover bars, and I love the profile on them, and this top is very similar. I don't care, obviously, about aerodynamics, given my size. And to be blunt, the new canoe paddles, I call them, that a lot of people are riding around on, I have no idea how these are comfortable. Let's see what we've got in the box. I should mention, it was very well packaged, and it took roughly 3 weeks to get directly from Avian in China. So you've got the bars, which I'll just pull out here. The bars are the more recent upgraded ones with graphene in them. I believe the initial batch of these weren't quite as stiff. And if you look at the measurements for these, this is the package. I got 420 mil right here, and the drops, they measure 440. Bang on. Stem length was also bang on, and in the past, I've heard Patrick Leno warn about this in some of his comments, that sometimes the stems tend to be a little bit longer or a little shorter, so you got to be careful about that. One of the issues with just ordering something blind. As far as stiffness goes, I played around with them a bit, and I don't really notice much of a difference from the previous Easton bars I had. So what comes with it is a spacer I had to spend $30 on, head cap, the bolt, and I always recommend, for those of you that don't, having extra bolts is a good thing. So I have an assortment in case I have to use a longer bolt. It comes with an instruction manual, which is actually useful. They give you all of the torque settings in here and some decent directions. I'm sure these premium Allen keys, a spare head for your Garmin mount, and some accessories here and mounting screws. And what's nice is, if you don't want to use the Garmin mount on the bottom here, you can replace it for this little piece right here, which allows you just to get rid of this. Other thing I've noticed here is reading the forums, there's some issues with previous versions of these mount stiffness. This seems plenty stiff. These were a sale item because they were slightly out of spec as far as their weights go. So what do we have? 289 grams. Technically this bar should weigh about 280. Now someone might say, well, of course that means it's probably stronger. I don't think so. There's probably just extra resin in it because I can't imagine them putting an extra layer or two of carbon in here when they were building it. The computer mount with the Garmin mount on it weighs 29 grams. I'm just going to compare that to a typical Garmin mount. So it's about the same weight. Spacer, typical for a spacer. And the head cap. 6 grams compared to your typical head cap that I had with the previous assembly. Not bad. So generally, it's pretty much a wash, other than the weight of the bars. So if I look here, I'm saving roughly 40 grams. One reviewer noted that the computer mount was not straight when he did up the bolts and he had to do some modifications. Mine you can get straight. There's a little bit of a play in the holes because the hole diameter is larger than the bolts. One issue I have though, it'd be nice if they drilled one more hole here. So if you don't have the full-size Garmins, like I've got a, I think it's a 530 or 540, that you can pull this back a bit. One minor thing is that the Garmin mount threads on the receiving female end here were not that great, and I had to work them to get the Garmin finger mount here to work with this. They do provide a nice, quite light bolt if you're a minimalist.
Finally, it's time to start getting a little intrusive with the consumer level downhole camera.
Starting on the left end of the bar, things were looking pretty good. And then as we scroll along here, there was a little bit of debris. And then, let me tell you, we came upon what I'm going to call a carbon layer or a carbon booger. I'm not sure what's going on there, but it looks like a layer of carbon was peeled up. And then we went to the right handlebar, and ooh, this got nasty. There seemed to be layers peeled up all over the place when I could get in with the consumer level borescope. Not exactly too inspiring, but it looked like it was just the last layer, or maybe that was residue from a bag. I'm not a carbon expert, and I can't say for sure. But particularly on the right end of the bar, it looked very similar to what I saw on the monitor while having a colonoscopy, which I wish on no one. Once you get above 50, I recommend minimizing your doctor's visits. But yeah, we can see that. And I even tried to go in with multiple devices and try to pull that out to figure out what it was, but I couldn't.
I went through 2 Easton bars that I have and a generic one-piece bar. There was absolutely no signs of any carbon boogers. But what gave me a little bit of comfort about the Avian bars is I went through these 1-up version 1 carbon bars that I've been using for several years. And they've got boogers or delamination or whatever similar to the Avian throughout them. And I've had exactly 0 issues with them.
Highlights.
Always know what your reference position is before you change your handlebars. In this case, I'm using the Abbey Tools lever setter. You can get imitations of this, but support the innovators, and I bought the original. And this is some sort of cheap Zitto handlebar slash dropout alignment checker. So what I've done is I put masking tape on here and marked the positions of both levers, just so I have a reference when I put my new handlebar in. The stem angle was the same, so the tops are relatively flat and the drops are exactly the way I like them, so my research paid off. I inspected the cables after I unhooked everything, and there's really doesn't seem to be any issues. What you're seeing there is residue from the bar tape. Same with this, the rear brake cable. What surprised me though is how much gunk there was on the bearing seat. Obviously, while I have the opportunity, I'm going to clean this up and re-grease everything. Checking the bearing out, it's perfectly fine, but I didn't expect it to not be okay. It's just a generic FSA bearing because I've got the exact same bearing on this 5 or 6 year old gravel bike in here, and I took it apart recently and it's still having no issues. Whenever you're doing this, thoroughly inspect around the interface of this compression ring and your steer. That's where the SL7s broke, if you remember those incidents. I have another video that's not too popular, but essentially probably down to about here, I've reinforced the inside of this steer with an aluminum tube. And as part of that, some of the major YouTubers such as Hambini and the Watt Life reported that their headsets kept loosening off. Mine's never loosened off, and one theory for that might be that I've reinforced the inside of this steerer, which may be flexy. The trick, because I like to buy tools, is I'm going to have 2 park pullers go at once to try to get the cables through. I pray to goodness, fingers crossed, that I have enough length. Pull a little bit on each cable, and you can see there it's going through the stem, and everything will be hidden by this $30 US piece of plastic. Not everyone has 2 park cables they can pull with, but the good news is if you put the lever here, I've got a ton of extra cable left. So what I'm probably going to do is any of the extra cable I'm going to try to push back into the bar, maybe to give me one bleed at a later date rather than cutting it to length. Also, I checked the steerer rotation and there's no sounds or anything. I would do that too before you hook everything up, just to make sure you don't have any issues. Using the trusty dusty alignment tool, we're almost there. The good news is I haven't wet the bed and miscalculated what bar I should have position or anything. It looks dorky with that amount of spacers, but you get over 50 and used to weightlift and see how your back does. If you look here, the lever, when I lined it up with the top of the steer, is still too high and I've got to rotate it forward, which means that my overall position has dropped about, let's say, 1/2 centimeter. And what I'm going to do is leave this dorky stem cap on, and then after riding hopefully a little bit more in the summer, losing a bit of stomach, I can drop a few spacers. Then I'm going to cut the steerer down a little bit. I finished the bars off with my favorite Silka tape, wrapped bottom to top. I know the trends recently is going from the top down to the bottom with a wrap here to reverse the direction, but I don't like the bulge under my shifter, and I have no problems with the bottom up over the years I've done it.
Impressions. I did the standard test loop that I use for testing, which has a 70 kilometer an hour downhill on it.
Boss, it's not good when you go straight into the sun. But I don't think Tom Pitcock's going to get nervous anytime soon. Woo!
Did a bunch of max effort sprints, varying my gear so I was either over or under geared to make it as awkward as possible. Rode some absolutely taint smashing sections of broken, poorly repaired, and chip sealed pavement. After 2 hours of riding in relatively nasty winter conditions, my general conclusion was that the Avian Canary bars may be slightly, and ever so slightly, less stiff than the Eastons, but nothing I'd be particularly concerned about or nothing that would make me want to replace the bars. Also, the position I was in was extremely close to the initial position of my original setup.
It's pretty risky buying things sight unseen, but I am pleased with my overall purchase of these Avian Canary bars, especially considering how much the equivalent big brand and higher profile brand options are. I've literally got a decent set of handlebars at half the price. Also, if you're going to consider doing this, do your research. I'm pretty proud of myself as I've managed to pretty much duplicate my riding position with these high quality Easton EC100 bars. With that, like, subscribe. If you disagree with me on anything, I will answer you. So light me up down below. And as always, even though it's still cold here, ride hard.